caregivers. This is Lynn Smargis, CSA CDP from Pacific Northwest Senior Care, and I'm excited to bring another episode of Caring for Your Aging Parents to your listening ears today, and to my viewers on YouTube. Today, as promised, I have my fabulous guests who are here for the last interview episode of this season. Their names are there are the Clancys. They have a podcast called The Loud Quiet. I would like to introduce Rick and Clancy Denton from The Loud Quiet. Rick and Clancy, welcome to Caring for Your Aging Parents.
Hello. Thank you. Glad to be here. Although I think there's times that we probably should just be the Clancys, right? Who runs this place?
That just sounds like such a family name, the Clancys.
It does. It does indeed. Well, thank y'all. Thank you for having us.
Yes.
We're excited about today.
Yeah, and I'm excited to have you guys on. I was on your show talking about my experiences, and I love that you guys came on here to talk about your experience because, Rick, your mom had dementia, and you guys had to deal with that as far as, being the Gen X adult children caring for your aging parent. So let's talk about that and jump into that, because I know one of the things that my clients deal with a lot is, they get a diagnosis for their parent of dementia or whatever it is. But then they make the mistake of waiting before they start looking at options. And I know you guys did not do that. And I think you guys went about it in a bit of a smarter approach. So tell me about the story about like when you've kind of started suspecting there might be dementia, what type of dementia it was, and then how did you guys get into caring for your mom and making those plans?
There's a lot of levels to that question, Lynn, actually. I'm going to let Clancy actually answer it first, because Clancy noticed something before any of the rest of us noticed something. My mom had always been sort of busy. Not sort of. My mom had always been very busy, to the point that she would be distracted at times, to the point that there might be things that were missed just because she was so busy in what she did. She was a travel agent, and that was a lot of work and something that she really enjoyed. And so when things started to slip or things got missed, maybe we didn't quite notice it as much, but I know you had found something or saw something early.
Well, in the fall of 2019, his mom and her husband came up to go to a football game. Our daughter danced and our son was a senior. And I just noticed that she was walking a little differently at the game. She had started to shuffle a little bit. I didn't really think too much of it. But when we got back to the house and we were looking at pictures and I was showing her pictures of our son and his girlfriend, she kept referring to the girlfriend as his sister, Tegan. And I was like, no, that's not Tegan. That's, Tanner's girlfriend, Samara. And we would go through some more pictures. And then she was like, oh, that's just such a great picture of Tegan. And so I was like, something is amiss. That was not like her at all to be confused about those kind of things. And I had mentioned it to Rick that weekend, and we kind of just blew it off. We really didn't even think about it.
Just people get distracted. Heck, I how all of us do when we're talking to our family. Sometimes we rotate through all of the family names, even including the family dog or the cat in the names that we call our kids, right? And so we just chalked it up. Yeah, right. I will call Tegan Miso sometimes just because you go through all the names. And that was something we just kind of put away. It didn't. And my mom doesn't live where we do, so we didn't see her daily or anything like that. Well, fast forward to the next summer, I believe it was. No, it wasn't all the way to summer. It was it was spring.
Early spring.
It was before
about
COVID.
6 months later that you had.
Before COVID. Yes, right.
She had, and my mom had done this all the time. She was doing international trips, and she was doing what's called a FAM, a familiarization trip, and it was with her and another woman on a safari in Africa. And my sister got a call from the woman who was on that trip. We didn't know this person. It is somehow she was able to locate my sister through social media and other paths and said, Rachel, my sister's name, I think something may be wrong with your mom. My mom, who has been a world traveler, who knows her way around both the fancy and the not fancy, the exotic, the industrialized and the non-industrialized, found herself getting confused in an airport. And I think it was the Amsterdam airport.
She
and
couldn't find her way back from the restroom.
She couldn't find these are basics. This is like, to her, this is like tying a shoe.
Mm-hmm.
I travel a bunch, and
awareness.
Airports are set up pretty much the same way. Like, it's pretty easy to find gates in an airport.
Yeah.
So that was the first awareness, and that got us, and that obviously then brought her husband, Jerry, into the conversation as well. And that's what began it. That was when it was, okay, this is real. There's something that's not right here. And then you just start with the actual official diagnosis and going down that path.
And I think it was March of 2020 that she got officially diagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so when she did get diagnosed, what type of medical provider did you take her to for the diagnosis, or did she go to?
And this is where it's going to be a little bit different, because her husband, Jerry, and the reason I keep referring to him as her husband, my dad passed away in 2003. Jerry married my mom about, I guess now at this point, it's 8-9 years ago. And so her husband, he was the one doing most of the primary caregiving. We, being 3 hours away, had some less effect on that. My sister, raising her family, was not as directly in the day-to-day being involved. And so it was her primary care is where it started, is going to her primary care.
And then she did go to a neurologist. And luckily, being in Austin, UT has some great programs.
Mm-hmm.
He actually got her into an experimental program. And I remember being on Zoom calls with social worker.
Yeah.
I mean, they had an entire group of people that got involved once she was diagnosed. She was still living at home, and we were still doing Zoom calls with her weekly, but you could tell things were just starting to change.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually having a team is really good, because when you have a team behind you, they all talk to each other. So it's not like the piecemeal medical, like one person's not talking to the other and they don't know, what medications you're taking and things like that. So I think that's a really great choice. If you're listening to this and you have that option, definitely go that route.
Mm-hmm.
So you've gotten her diagnosed by a neurologist. I always recommend that. Like, even if your GP thinks it is dementia, definitely get diagnosed by a specialist like a neurologist or a gerontologist. So that was definitely a smart move on your part. And then, so she got diagnosed, you're on weekly Zoom calls with her. Then what next?
Well, in the what next, a lot of it is just, okay, that's life. Mm-hmm. Right. And keep in mind the timing here as well. This is COVID. So we couldn't go visit my mom. We couldn't go. And that was true of a lot of folks not being able to see their family members. And so on one hand, the fact that COVID created such a remote reality actually kind of worked okay for us, because then it allowed us this new way of interacting with our family that we didn't have available before. If you tried to do this in 2010, the thought of having a weekly video call with your mom as she's descending through Alzheimer's would be really odd. And instead, it wasn't all that odd to just be able to interact in that way. Jerry continued to be the primary of guiding her through any sort of medical diagnoses, any medical care that needed to be there. He also, you spoke of team, by getting her involved in this trial, allowed even more of that team, because the team that's behind the trial is by design working to make this an ecosystem that surrounds the patient so that they can learn the most from that patient and that patient's experience. So not that everyone has access to that, but I will say that, and I'm not here to say that it was all good that she was a part of that trial. I'm here to say that that certainly contributed to elements of that team aspect.
And then how did you feel as far as choosing her doctors? And I know that your stepdad, Jerry, was doing a lot of that, but do you feel like that was challenging? Like, what do you feel like were some of the more challenging aspects of her care as the dementia developed?
Jerry is very good. We have a very good relationship, which thank goodness. He was very good about, before he made any decisions, even about the experimental trial, we would hop on discussions. He did not choose to do anything without fully involving Rick and his sister, and then me and her husband. So that was very good. It got to be very hard for us and Rachel and Stephen when her Alzheimer's turned into this other syndrome that is called Capgras. That's when it started really affecting. We knew we had to do something, because what that is the person who has the Alzheimer's thinks that their primary caregiver is trying to harm them in some way or has kidnapped them. She was trying to get out of the house and she would run to the neighbors. Jerry had to put certain locks on the house. He tried to get her to wear a watch or at least carry her phone.
Mm-hmm.
But that was where it really changed the situation.
It did. And as we were getting into that idea of wearing her watch, there was a watch that she had for him to be able to locate her, because he couldn't be assured that she would carry her phone with her. Mm-hmm. Well, even that, she was for a time able, the neighborhood that they live in, it's an oval. It is almost a locked in oval that she could walk the dog around, and he felt secure doing that. But frequently she would start to wander out of that. Mm-hmm. And that's when you start to realize that then he has to kind of get a little tighter with what she's able to do. All of this is while we, the kids, are still not able to really see her mm-hmm. because of COVID. He, as a caregiver, is having to do this all by himself. And he's got a special place in heaven for his willingness to care for my mom. But he made the mistake that a lot of caregivers make, and that is not reaching out for help sooner. Mm-hmm. This Capgras syndrome, we only later came to realize that like she was physically beating on him, or physically
trying to
push him away, running out, all of that. And we, Rachel and I, almost started to force Jerry's hand in, less about care for my mom, not that it wasn't, but more about, Jerry, you as the caregiver have to take care of yourself in mm-hmm. order to be able to care for our mom. And that's when we were able to really get the conversation around, it is time for a memory care community during that syndrome phase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so for Capgras syndrome, for people who don't know, is that something that is a common secondary syndrome people get with dementia in general, or Alzheimer's specifically?
It's
6%.
Yeah, it's a very small percentage.
It's not a 0.001. It's also not
right.
90.
Mm-hmm.
So it exists. If you think of 100 Alzheimer's patients, if 6 have it, and forgive me if I don't have the exact right numbers, but it's in that range.
But it's very interesting because Rick's mom and then my aunt both developed it. And so to know 2 people that have had it when I had never even heard of it before. And
it's so heartbreaking for the caregiver, because they know in their heart that they're doing the best thing. And then on a daily basis, multiple times a day, being screamed at and yelled at that they are a captor and that they're the prisoner or that they are the prison keeper and all of that. It is incredibly hard for the caregiver in that specific syndrome.
Yeah, I can imagine, because I know from my experience caring for my parents, just caring for them in and of itself, right, is definitely takes the toll on your emotional, physical, all of those things. But to add that on top of it is almost like the insult to injury, right? It's like you're doing all of these things, you're expending yourself, you're exhausted, and then on top of that, they're just yelling at you, and they feel like they're the prisoner trying to get out of their house. So this is obviously not a very common thing with Alzheimer's, the Capgras syndrome. Actually, let's take a break right here. So when we get back, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, and then you're continuing care moving forward. This is really great. So let's take a break here, and then when we come back, we'll talk more about how Rick and Clancy moved on with moving forward with taking care of Rick's mom during this time. Okay, so we're back with our second half of today's episode, and I have my wonderful guests here, Rick and Clancy Denton from the Loud Quiet podcast, which we're going to talk about at the end of the show. You definitely want to tune into their podcast if you are also empty nesters listening to this. So Rick and Clancy, so at this point, it's COVID. It's middle of COVID, full blown COVID. So your stepdad, Jerry, has been caring for your mom, Rick. And at this point, the Capgras syndrome has really kicked in. She's yelling and screaming at your stepdad all the time. And so how did you go about talking to your stepdad about caring for himself? Because I know that's a really hard thing for people to talk about with their parents, because a lot of times, especially a husband will be like, no, this is my responsibility. I can't stop
Yeah.
taking care of her. She's my wife.
And I'm glad we're getting into this, because I think that's something that was the most eye-opening to me as we went through this process. Is when you think about the hierarchy of generations, you tend to look up to that generation as a position of authority. And so you tend to defer to that generation as they're the ones that are in charge. They're the ones that are the boss, and not in a sort of weak deferential sort of way, but rather just, hey, look, if they're saying something, that's the way it's going to be. Complicated a little bit further in that Jerry was a late marriage, second marriage to my mom. And so it wasn't that he raised my sister and me. He is a wonderful man who married my mom, but we didn't think of him as a father or anything along those lines. He was the guy that married my mom. All of that weaves together in a situation where it made it hard for Rachel and me to be able to say to Jerry, look, we think you need to do this, or this is the way it needs to be. I'll add to that he has an incredible intellectual sense, an electrical engineer. And so he would do all of the deep research. And so a lot of times he did know what he was talking about. In a way, I think this syndrome actually opened the door for Rachel and me to say, this isn't right. And eventually we had to step in and say, this does not work. We need to start doing that. And instead of saying, we think you should do X, Y, and Z, the conversations became, we think a community is right, and I am going to research 5 communities. Rachel is going to do this. And so we started to choose actions that weren't debated. We just said, we're doing this as a way to help you with future decisions, but we're taking that off your plate. We haven't even talked about the administration of managing a household and those sorts of things. We started to take things off of Jerry's plate that we could manage so that he would then focus on exclusively the care of my mom. That started to change some of that generational dynamic and allowing us to be not necessarily the authorities, but viewed more as peers rather than whatever the generation above us says.
Yeah, and that was very good. And me watching it from the side as the spouse, it was very much Rick and Rachel both asking all the time, what can we take off of your plate to relieve some of the stress that you're dealing with so that you can just focus on Linda?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example just so that folks understand what we're talking about. Through some generations, my grandmother had a home that then my mom had, and so it was a rent home. Jerry was managing this rent home that he actually had no real ownership in, or he was just doing it on behalf of my mom. Well, anybody that's had a rental property knows that can be a lot of work, and it's kind of a pain, especially when there's an HOA involved and dealing with all that garbage. So that was one of the first things that we could say to Jerry, Jerry, stop. We got this. We're going to handle this. You can write the checks because you have to have the authority, but we got this. And so starting to take some of those administrative duties helped us balance that support for him, the caregiver, and help us force that conversation when it came time to say, it's beyond your capability.
Yeah. And I think another aspect of that that's really good too is that a lot of times when a spouse is taking care of a spouse, they feel like they have to do everything because it's their spouse. But what they don't realize is that if they are doing anything, like you said, if they are doing all the administrative tasks, all the research, and taking care of their spouse, they're really not able to have any type of romantic partner relationship with that person, right? Even though if it might not, even though the only physicality might be holding hands, right? They can't have that relationship because they're doing so many other things that they're too busy to have that relationship with them. So what you guys gave him was really like the opportunity to, as much as he could have, right, with your mom and that with that medical challenge, reconnect with your mom, or have at least have more time to spend with her that may have been some more quality time at the end.
I think when we get to talking about moving my mom into a community, that's where a lot of that really kicks in, is that so much of that was then offloaded from him and he could just be the one who spent time with my mom.
Yeah. And so how did you guys go about moving your mom into a community? Because that's another question I get from a lot of my clients. Like, okay, my mom has dementia, and a lot of people want to wait until further along in dementia to move into a community. I always recommend people move someone into a community as soon as possible. Like, if they have just got diagnosed with dementia and they're still pretty decent about living, with someone else at home, then that's fine. But you don't want to wait until they're so far along that they're not even remembering family members to move them, because then it's very stressful for the person with dementia because they have no idea what's going on. So how did you guys go about moving your mom into a memory care facility from being at home?
Well, our hand was forced, right? With this syndrome, there was no longer a debate as to whether it's time or not. Jerry, up until that syndrome, had been understandably so somewhat resistant, but that forced the hand. So it never became a discussion of should we, shouldn't we? It was we have to. And to use the word regret is a little strong, but in retrospect, I think had we started the research, it would have made the next steps a little smoother. However, Jerry has, and this is such an important stuff that I think we are trying to model as we age. He had such a support network of his friends, specifically his friends through the church that he and my mom had attended, that it became a lot easier to find a community when you can ask 4 or 5 other people, where did you place your spouse? How did you choose the community for your aunt? And so we had a series of referrals that made it very easy for us to say, okay, we believe these 3 are the best potential options. And then ultimately choosing one, along with it being a great facility, and we can talk about this more. I think one of the biggest things about the community that we chose for my mom is that it was exceptionally close to both Jerry and to my sister in Austin, allowing incredible frequency of visits.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that, because we were specifically targeting memory care facilities, that I think made it even a little bit easier because we had such a niche that we were looking at. And also when we got ready to move her, she didn't know that we weren't taking all of her things with her. And they are very specific at those places. Only bring this many pair of pants, they just don't need all of that extra stuff.
Because a lot of it tends to grow legs and walk away from the residence rooms anyway in a memory care facility.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So you guys were obviously private pay. So you were going in there privately paying for your mom's care, which makes a huge difference too, because it's very hard to find memory care that accepts Medicaid. So you guys were very fortunate. You were able to get that care for your mom in a place that did also have room, because that's another challenge is finding a memory care that actually has an opening.
Right.
So when you guys were actually moving her into the memory care, were there any things that you did that you felt were helpful in getting her that transition, or was it just mainly just physically moving her from home to the memory care?
It's actually both in your question there. There were things that we did, and it was physically moving her. The director of operations at the memory care facility said, here's how we do it. And I think that's one of the things that we really valued, is there was no hemming and hawing. This is how we welcome a resident into our community. And it was as, we're going to bring her in, we're going to take her back basically behind the door, and then Jerry, you're not going to see her for X number of days until she acclimates to the community. Trust us, this is how it goes. We had set up her room with a few of the mementos. There's a shadow box that was put together to help some of that. Jerry had created a memory book for her to be able to flip through and see pictures that might be familiar. But that clean break is something that I know no other experience. It is one that served us well, because they actually reached out to Jerry a couple of days later. It was like a day and a half, and said, hey, instead of 3 days, she's ready. And when we then went to go see my mom in the community, she was raving about it. Now, she didn't quite understand what it was. She thought it was the best school she had ever been to, and wanted my daughter to attend that school when it was time for her to attend school. But even in spite of that, and trust me, we have a lot of laughing moments inside of the Alzheimer's experience, because you have to. We laughed about that because she was happy. We didn't care that she thought it was school. She was happy that she was at this great school.
Right. And that's another thing that some people who take care of people with dementia don't understand. Like, they think, oh, I'll tell them what's really happening so they understand. So maybe that will, quote unquote, like, get them out of their dementia or wake them up, which it doesn't do, because first of all, dementia is just going to progress and make it worse. And then second of all, it's just going to create a ton of anxiety for the other person. So you guys did a really good job caring for your mom, saying like, hey, yeah, this is a great school. I'm so glad you like it. Like you actually, what I call it is like playing into their playbook, right? Like playing into their, whatever their reality is. And it's not bad for them. That is their reality, right? So for you to tell them something different, that would be like someone coming into our home and saying, well, you don't live here, like this, get out. Right. Like, so you have to really mold your viewpoint and understand theirs and play into their playbook that way to make them feel comfortable and happy. Cause that's really your end goal, right? Is to make sure that your parents are happy as they can be with that. Now she's in the memory care. How did her Capgras syndrome show up when she was in memory care? Like, did it get better because she was with people? Like what happened at that point?
I don't know of any other than maybe a couple of random agitation situations. I think it just went away.
And nothing towards Jerry.
No.
Everything when Jerry would show up, it was very much love and you could see their connection. So yeah, that did not, I think taking her out of the situation and him not being her primary caregiver, just it negated it. And the same thing happened with my aunt as well, because it was only towards her husband. So
interesting.
I mean,
if somebody
immediate.
does have Capgras syndrome, they most likely will benefit from being in a memory care because that's not like when they're at home and there's one person, that's the focus, right? But when they're in this expansive community, there's so many people to interact with. And it's very common, even when you don't have Alzheimer's or dementia, right? For us to lash out at people we love the most and not at our friends. So that I can see from that perspective as well.
Yeah, it was one of those decisions that you could look back and go, man, I wish we'd done it sooner, but not too much sooner. Like she was doing fine in the house up until the point that she wasn't doing fine in the house. And I don't want to say it was a switch that flipped, but it was pretty dramatic when that pivot happened. So sure, we could have gotten her in a couple months earlier or something like that. But once she was there, it was great. And yes, she told us that she couldn't wait for the realtor to come back with my dad, who'd passed away in 2003, so that they could buy property there. Those are the kind of little things that, well, they don't make sense to me, but it shows me how happy and secure she felt there. And what Clancy was saying, whether we were perceiving it or whether it was real, it didn't matter. We saw what appeared to be this connection between Jerry and my mom, that when they would sit there quietly holding hands for minutes and hours on end, there was that connection. And I don't know if the community did that or something in the back of her brain recognized it, but there was just a piece that she had by being in that community that I think a lot of us, when we think about, quote, putting our parents in a home, oh no, how awful that we are. But actually, this was the best thing we could have done for my mom. And I'm so glad for the experience that she had there.
Yeah. And I know environment has a lot to do with how people act with dementia. And so I'm sure that obviously in your case and in Clancy in your mom's case too, would have been a really big game changer, because had your stepdad insisted on keeping her home and he kept her home, the last year of her life would have been just them arguing. He wouldn't have had those moments at the end of her life to spend with her. So I think that was such a good choice all the way around, because your mom was happy. Her husband was happy, like they got to spend time together. You guys got to spend time with your mom, like, that was quality time and not just watching your mom, have all these symptoms from Capgras syndrome. So I think that was a really great choice. So how long did it take you to find a memory care, from like the time you said, hey, we're going to take this off the plate, to the time where you signed the contract and said, okay, this is where we're going to be moving mom?
Couple months.
Yeah, it was not long. Y'all only looked at a couple of places, and this one came highly recommended, and they had an opening.
And there,
you guys got really lucky.
We did, and I'll say this: it is a bit from a position of privilege, like you said. It's private pay. My mom had purchased long-term care insurance, and so there were elements of the economics that helped this be available, and also just serendipitous blessing from above in that they'd opened up a new wing. So there were just elements that kind of worked in our favor. But I didn't want to let that long-term care insurance go without being mentioned. That certainly, clearly didn't pay for everything, but it
Yeah,
absolutely helped bring some of those communities into the discussion that might not have been otherwise a part of the discussion.
Oh, absolutely. I always recommend to my adult clients to buy long-term care insurance because it'll pay for several $1,000s a month, depending on the plan you get for your care, like no matter what type of care you need. And that's the advantage is a lot of people think like, oh, Medicare will pay for memory care or Medicare will pay for assisted living, and they don't. And so they will pay for services like if you have OT or PT inside of those places, but they do not pay for assisted living or memory care. And that's a big misnomer a lot of people have is like, oh, I'll just have my mom's Medicare pay for it. And they don't. And then they're looking at this like $6,000 a month bill for assisted living, let alone memory care. So can I ask you guys, how much a month did you pay for your mom's memory care?
I think it was around 8. I think
That's
it was
pretty
8,000 a month. And plus or minus 1,000, which I know sounds very flippant, but I just can't remember exactly because Jerry was not paying, but it was around that range. Now, she also had
private.
We were able to bring in some private care for her as well. Some other caregivers that were able to spend and give her a little extra attention while she was in there. And so that certainly helped. I still submit that had that not been there, it still would have been a good experience. This just allowed it to be even more secure and great experience. I don't know what those numbers would be, but it probably took it somewhere in the 10 or above range.
Yeah. And that's pretty typical. Like memory care will start at around 8 and go all the way up to like 15 or 18,000 a month, depending on the services that you need or get at that place. And of course, obviously like everything else, right? There's the not so nice places all the way up to like the very plush luxury places to stay and like everything else, right? In the world. So Rick and Clancy, before we close out today and we introduce your podcast, is there any other advice you would give to my adult children who are listening to this, who may suspect their mom has dementia and or their mom or dad has dementia and they're not sure what to do for next steps?
Well, first, don't ignore the signs.
Yeah,
because
they're not just busy.
I have several people that have told me, my mom's doing this or my grandma's doing this. I'm like, you need to go have her checked ASAP. And don't ignore the signs.
Once you have a diagnosis, because you don't ignore the signs, it just changes your mentality. If you can deny it and push it off, then you're not doing the things you need to be doing, having that diagnosis. I think the other thing I'd add, and it's not so much about the beginnings of Alzheimer's, but this is the end. Hospice, this was an eye-opening thing for me. Hospice is not your family member has 3 days to live. Hospice is when you've made that decision that care is no longer going to be dedicated towards improving or healing, but rather just keeping a quality of life intact as they pass away gracefully. Moving my mom into the hospice phase of living was a great choice because she was then able to get equipment and different kind of care. And I think some folks may be reluctant to choose to even explore that because they think that's only reserved for it's 72 hours. Let's get all the family here because my loved one's about to pass away. My mom was on hospice for 1.5 years.
Yeah, probably about a year and a half.
So that's something that I think folks may not know. And that'd be the one other thing I'd share is, when you realize it's time to make that decision, know that it's not necessarily just a 72-hour kind of thing. It can be a great way to care for your loved one for a much longer period of time.
Yeah. And I know with a hospice, you have to have a note from a doctor saying they have 6 months or less to live. But like you said, right, you can stay on hospice for longer than 6 months. And the care that they get is excellent. You get so much more support. I remember when I got hospice for my dad, it was like, I should have done this earlier because I got so much support. Just knowing that what he was going through was quote unquote normal for the end of life was just like, thank goodness. Like I didn't mess up caring for him.
Those hospice nurses know what they're doing, not just for the patient, but for the caregiver and the extended family. And they were a blessing for all of us.
Yeah. And a lot of people also think too, that when you go in hospice, they take all your medications away, which is not true. You just can't do specific curative things.
Right.
Yes.
Great point. Absolutely not. And I think that's what it is. There's just so much misconception about what it is and what it isn't. And choosing it, we chose it at exactly the right time for my mom. Thank goodness that Jerry knew what he was doing. But I know that not everybody would necessarily have that same guidance. And that's what I would offer up.
Awesome. Well, that is fabulous advice, guys. So let's jump into your podcast, The Loud Quiet, because I love your podcast. It's really great. And if you're listening to this and you are an empty nester like myself, Rick and Clancy, you definitely want to check it out. So Rick and Clancy, tell us about what is your podcast about, The Loud Quiet? What do you guys talk about on it? And where can people find it?
Well, we started the Loud Quiet the summer that our daughter left for school. She's our youngest, and we looked at each other and said, okay, we're empty nesters now. And we just decided, let's start a podcast. We'll share our experiences. And so now we're going on almost 2 years. And it's been great. It's just been a way for us to stay connected, connect with our audience, and just share our experiences. And there are several episodes about Rick's mom and those kind of things. And I'll let you tell where.
Yeah, and a lot of what makes the show something that we love is guests like Lynn. You were on here just a few weeks ago, and so I hope that you can drop your episode in the show notes so that folks can see the greatness of Lynn inside of the Loud Quiet ecosystem. You didn't quite sell it exactly what it was. The reason that we started is we said, well, how are we going to stay together and stay married in the empty nest? Do something together.
We weren't in dire straits.
No, we weren't. But there's the recognition that gray divorce is real and something serious. And so we did that as a way to stay connected. And then we realized it's something that can help the wider empty nest community. And if folks want to watch it, it's on YouTube. You find it at the Loud Quiet Empty Nest Living. It's also on any of the podcast apps. And the easiest way to get to that is just go to theloudquiet.com, and everything I said is available there.
Perfect. And for people who are listening or watching on YouTube, we'll make sure we put those in the show notes so you'll have that link available. Well, Rick and Clancy, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your experience with caring for your mom, Rick. This has been, I feel like, a huge valuable episode for my listeners to just hear it from someone else's personal experience who has actually gone through that. So thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us on, Lynn.
All right, my friends and caregivers, remember to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching for Caring for Your Aging Parents. And remember, my caregivers, to take time out to take care of yourself, because if you don't, no one else will do that for you. And you can't care for somebody else unless you're caring for yourself. This is Lynn Smargis, CSA CDP, signing off for this week. And I will hopefully talk to you next week on another episode of Caring for Your Aging Parents.